It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Peter Levangie, President and Chief Executive Officer of Bay State Milling Company. Pete's responsible for all functional areas of the company and its daily operating activities. He joined Bay State Milling in 2004 as the Vice President of Strategic Planning. In 2009, the board elected him President and Chief Operating Officer, and he was named CEO in 2016. Previously, Pete was Chief Operating Officer of EFS Network, offering supply chain solutions to the food service industry. He began his career with Cargill and had various merchandising and general management positions, both after and before attaining his MBA from Harvard Business School. He achieved his bachelor's degree from Dartmouth College. Pete currently serves as the chair of the board of Project Bread, the leading anti-hunger organization in Massachusetts. He's an avid runner and marathoner, enjoys spending time and traveling with his wife and 3 children, and loves being in the mountains of Montana, the birthplace of his wife. Peter Levangie, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks, Brent.
Oh, great to have you here, Pete. And I hate to say it, but I'm in sunny Southern California. I know you've had your 3rd or 4th nor'easter this year, but how are you holding up in the Boston area? Is the airport closed and the roads cleared up again?
You know, it's since I'm essentially homebound, those things that I would normally pay attention to, I'm not even sure, Brent, but I'm here.
Well, the pandemic has its advantages, doesn't it? Right? We don't have to be out on the road. Of course, there is the shoveling that has to be done, but that's kind of regardless of whether we were homebound or not. Well, listen, it's great to hear your voice and have you back. We spoke a week or so ago. But speaking of the pandemic, how are you doing? How's your family? And how's Bay State Milling with regards to, all that's happened in this last 11, 12 months?
Well, thanks for asking. My family as well. We've had a few challenges with COVID, but relative to many others, we're doing great. I think
Great to hear.
The company has managed the challenges of COVID extremely well. I think the business. We've got 3 different businesses, and one has really thrived. I would say another has had mixed results, and then a third, which is more of a startup, highly dependent on new product development, is a little bit stalled, which has been one of the challenges of COVID.
Yeah. Well, food production is an essential industry. Has Bay State Milling done well overall? Are you guys about the same as you were a year ago, or as the other parts of the business that have suffered hit you a bit from a financial growth standpoint?
We are about on par with last year. I would say we were coming into COVID pretty evenly balanced between away from home and at home eating. We certainly suffered, particularly in April when the whole country was shut down, and that was not an easy time, and it took us a while to climb out. But the team has done an excellent job pivoting, which is the perhaps overused term these days, but pivoting where we needed to, and really shoring up some of the risks that have been involved, and then really exploiting some of the opportunities. So on balance, I think we feel pretty blessed, and our team has, we've got 9 plants, and they've all been operating through it all, and have done an excellent job managing the human side of this in terms of personal safety risk. So really proud of them there.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear it. And hopefully with vaccines getting extended throughout the country and a lot of the safeguards in place, things will begin to tick up. We're recording this in kind of mid-February. I think it's going to probably be released a little bit later in the year. But once again, congrats on that. And I'm glad to hear that your family and your staff are well. But let's talk about you, a little bit about your early years. Tell us where you grew up and what your early family life was like, Peter.
Well, I'm a Boston guy, so I grew up in a suburb of Boston, one of the older towns in the United States, Dedham, Massachusetts, little dead end street there, and spent most of my life here outside of Boston until college started, and then went to college in the New England area. But then after that, have lived all over, but then managed to make my way back here to my roots, which has been terrific.
Dartmouth and Harvard, no easy passes there for either of those. I don't think I'd mentioned it, but actually my daughter's a 21er. She's a senior this year at Dartmouth, and it's been a tough go for a lot of kids in school. I know that you've got some kids school age too, but she certainly joined the experience there. And I think you were there in the early 90s, right? Late 80s, early 90s.
I was. I graduated in 91, and in fact, we have that in common, Brent. My oldest daughter is also class of 21.
Is she really? Oh my gosh, great. Is she in sports at all? My daughter's a rower, actually.
No, she's a singer and quite involved in some of the more social justice activities up there. So, yeah.
Cool. Well, great to have that in the family. But let's talk about a little bit about your earlier days. Brothers and sisters, only child. What was it like growing up in that part of Boston?
You bet. I am one of four. I am the only son. So I've got an older sister and two younger sisters.
Right. Cool. And mom and dad work from the home. Mom, I suppose, perhaps during that period, or was she also a professional?
That's right. So my father is a second generation owner operator of a kind of classic town pharmacy, and in many respects was the last one standing as that industry got consolidated. And my mother actually worked over most of her time as an administrative assistant between Boston College and then over at the College Board. Right.
Cool. So in education, mom and dad probably believed in that as well. Did all four of you go on to colleges and attain your degrees?
We did. Yeah. I think early on that was a big focus of my folks. I mean, both of them probably didn't have the circumstances. My mother grew up in a family where of four as well, three siblings, two girls and another sister, and the women were not expected to go to college.
That's right. Yeah.
And so she didn't really have a good shot. And then my father was forced into a path in that his father, my grandfather, had a stroke, and so his path, which seemed open in front of him, became very clear that he needed to learn the pharmacy profession. Right. So they were very committed to investing in education and making sure we had a lot of choices. So
Boston is known for its long lineage in terms of folks that, kind of grow up there and stay there. Were they both from, the Boston area originally?
Yes, very parochial. My father, our house on this little dead end street, I think was, as the crow flies, less than a half a mile away from where he grew up. And
nice.
And my mom was a couple miles away. So
yeah, cool. Great. What were some of the earliest memories you have, maybe, of some of the imprinting that they did? Any wise words of advice that mom and dad gave you as you were growing up that, kind of steered you on your way?
Absolutely. I think a couple things that were sort of family values. One was really hard work. And though my mom did not start working outside the house until my youngest sister went off to high school, they were just incredibly hardworking people. My father went through a period where he lost his sort of right hand in the store, not his physical right hand, his right hand person. And, he was banging it out like 7 days a week for almost 2 years. And then my mom, who was really active in the community and also active in promoting a lot of extracurricular activities for us. She just was tireless, so that was good. A big part of it. I think the other thing both of them share is this notion of kindness. They're just very kind people. Be respectful in the community. So absolutely. And had a big impression on, I think, my work ethic and how I like to show up in the world.
Awesome. I know the standards for Dartmouth entry are high, having been through that myself with my youngest. So I assume you were a fairly good student in school. What were the things that you excelled at? What did you enjoy, elementary, high school, those periods?
Yeah, so I was super fortunate in that, back to my parents being committed to education, I actually attended an all-boys school for both middle school and high school called Roxbury Latin, which is notable in that it's the oldest school in continued existence in the U.S. So it's founded in 1645.
Wow.
And tremendous sort of history but it really, having grown up in Dedham and with parents who were fairly parochial in their view of the world, though loving and hardworking, going to a place like Roxbury Latin just totally opened my eyes. It's a very, very challenging environment academically.
Right.
A lot's expected of you, but at the same time, they really promote you to stretch, try different activities. So I was athletic, so played sports, captain the soccer team. We had a very successful lacrosse team, sang in the glee club and in an a cappella group, editor of the paper, class officer. It was just a fantastic.
You're a real underachiever, Peter.
Well, better be lucky than good. I think I have a dear mentor who quotes, and I think it's Charlie Chaplin, that half a life is just showing up. But
that's right.
No, a lot of energy, and academically, I did do well. I think what I learned at a place like Roxbury Latin is just how much excellence there is in the world, and I think that things on a relative basis, I think academically I tend to do well, but I generally, for that cream of the crop intellect, if it takes her an hour to do the work, it takes me 3. But I'll make sure we're both done on time.
You got that hard work ethic. Yeah,
that's right.
Absolutely. What about entrepreneurial things? Anything you were involved with growing up that gave you that extra spending money?
Yeah, I would say, I have I love the new. I love trying new things. I would never classify myself as, particularly in the world today, the sorts of entrepreneurs we have that have achieved so many great things. I think I have an entrepreneurial spirit, but back to how I expressed perhaps my interest in doing things. I always was working, raking leaves, shoveling driveways, both for family for generally discounted prices, like my grandparents, and then the neighbors. But always had jobs. My father, his store, he had a building, and then just had a lot of summer jobs. So, and had the opportunities to try a lot of different things.
Did you have some hobbies that kind of the pocket money went towards during those years that you enjoyed outside of school?
Absolutely. I mean, I was very athletic.
What were your sports?
So they were, soccer was absolutely number one, and really still have a passion for that. I also started playing lacrosse in middle school and high school, and grew to love that. And though it would be hard for you to appreciate, Brant, this was not the wisest decision. I loved basketball, but when I sort of topped out at 5'7", in high school, I decided there was probably a different path, so I focused on those other two. Right, but I love also, and I'm a huge runner now, so I do usually knock out a marathon a year and love to run. But hobbies, the spending money stuff. I love music. And, and back then, if you think about how we accessed music, first there were records.
That's right. Yeah.
My first record was Saturday Night Fever.
I love it. I love it.
I'm a little bit ashamed to admit to that, but it's true.
I love it.
The Bee Gees rocking it out.
Yeah, sure.
And I recall, I don't even know, Rant. I must have been in fifth grade. I would, they had these devices, I guess is the common boom boxes, right?
Oh, right.
And you could put a cassette tape in the boom box. And so I would ride my bike to a local merchandiser, one of these big stores back then. I think it was called Lechmere. And I literally would walk into the store and just gaze at the boom boxes. And then I'd figure out how much money I had. And then I'd start closing the gap. I think it probably took me a year to buy that boom box.
I love it.
Yep.
I love it. Those things were great. So college obviously was in your future. A lot of, parental leadership, I'm sure, in that area. And you went on to study government, as I understand it, at Dartmouth. First of all, the choice of Dartmouth, tell us a little bit about that and your field of study. Dartmouth
became a really clear choice as I started to look at schools, in that what really appealed to me is I definitely wanted to go to a place that had a great reputation for academic excellence. And so that sort of checked that box. At the time, and I think it's still true, it's got a very outdoorsy culture, which I appreciated.
Yeah. What was it called in freshman year? I know our daughters both went through that, where they go off into the woods. Yeah, the freshman trip, they go out for a week or so. My daughter loved that.
Yeah, it's great. And it's just a beautiful setting. I think the other thing that really resonated, and true or not, I think it was, at least as I walked through the school, and it was a place for people who were intellectual and generally excelled at many things, but didn't take themselves too seriously. And that really felt right to me. So, and as I said, I think my experience, the friends I made, the activities I participated in, seemed to ring true.
Great community there. Yeah, absolutely. And went on to study government. Was there an interest to get into government at one point in time, or was that the liberal arts path you chose based on, the field of study, so to speak?
Right. College for me was, coming in there really not having a professional sense of direction. I fully embraced liberal arts. And it was really, I took a lot of classes in different areas. I actually, and I think these days it would count as sort of officially as a minor. I did take quite a bit of economics. In late, probably as I got into my junior year, I sort of figured that I didn't want to be a doctor, didn't want to be a lawyer. And then you say, well, what's left? There's lots of cool professions, but I found myself drawn to the business community. So government was really what drove me there within the liberal arts experience. Was I was really fascinated with a few things: comparative government, just different systems, how culture, geography tends to impact those systems, and then international relations. And in particular, I spent 1989, the fall, if you recall, that's the time the wall came down. Dartmouth had great study abroad programs, and I happened to be in Budapest on
oh my gosh, fantastic!
And it was just fascinating. I was literally in the streets of Prague when the Green Revolution started. And so
was that your sophomore year or your junior year?
That was my junior fall, and
terrific.
It was really cool. And I think that seeing, living under a crumbling system that was in place in the Eastern Bloc is just fascinating. So
great experience.
Yeah, it was great.
What was the first job you took out of Dartmouth?
So the first job, and I'm super grateful to Dartmouth for this. So I actually worked at Dartmouth. It was the winter of my junior year. I was an athlete, so I was up there training for lacrosse.
Yeah.
And I I had to be on campus to train, but I wasn't in class because of the funky Dartmouth system. And I took a job at their career center. And so
cool.
that was very formative in that I helped the woman that actually ran the whole corporate recruiting program.
Oh,
and it was through that I started to really get to see what different organizations, companies, and going into my junior year summer, I really wanted to do something different. I hadn't seen much of the world, but I got a good flavor for it doing this study abroad program. And the woman that ran the career center pushed me to interview with a company called Cargill, which, you know, way back in 1990, particularly those of us who've grown up in the Northeast would have never heard of Cargill.
Right. Sure.
And
well, that $1 billion privately owned company that no one had heard of.
I think they're about 120 billion these days.
I know.
And so
crazy.
So I interviewed with them, and they were incredibly, even then, global, which was fascinating to me. This whole sort of wanting to live abroad. But so we hit it off. I interviewed. I went out to their corporate headquarters, which I had never seen anything like that, Brent. It's a beautiful corporate headquarters. I mean, you know, it rivals any Fortune.
Are they in Michigan, Wisconsin? I know it's somewhere
just outside of Minneapolis, Minnetonka.
Minneapolis, right.
And it was just incredibly impressive. So I was really wow, this is super cool. I hit it off with all the people. And then they offered me the job and they said, Pete, this is going to be great. You know, it's either going to be Minneapolis, Seattle, Denver, a whole bunch of cities. I'm like, wow, any of those would just be fascinating. And so the term, you know, it's getting to the end of the term and summer is approaching. And, you know, the phone rings in my dorm because, you know, back then we had the pay phones. Hey,
that's right.
You know, Levangie, the phone's for you. I pick up the phone and the recruiter, who couldn't have been more earnest, said, Pete, we have the best internship for you. And he said, you're going to have the best time. This is such a great opportunity. It's in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And I got to tell you, Brent,
oh man,
geography of the United States is not, you know, like as a parochial Bostonian, I was like, Iowa,
cosmopolitan.
That's one of those I states. I'm like, where the heck is Iowa? And I literally, there was no going back. There was no plan B. Sure. So I got off the plane in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and this wonderful gentleman who ran that business picked me up, and I had a lacrosse stick in one hand and a bag in the other. And he asked me, have you ever heard of a soybean? And I said, never heard of one. So he took me out to a soybean field. And so back to what I did after college. So that was a fabulous internship.
Yeah. Was that a 1-year program, Pete? Or
it was just the summer. But,
just the summer. Wow.
But, you know, I was fortunate. They offered me an opportunity to come back full time when I was done with school. I did look around, but what I ended up doing, Brant, sorry, long answer to a simple question. So my first full-time job was with Cargill.
And so, and then how long were you with them? What was that? Did you kind of go up? Did you go back to Cedar Rapids, or where did they put you?
So I ended up I started in Georgia, and in the job, it was such a terrific job. So I worked in one of their bigger businesses, which was an ingredient business. They actually processed oil seeds, primarily a soybean, right? Sure. And all kinds. It was mostly vegetable oil, right? So they actually separate the protein and the fat, and the protein is what is called soybean meal. It goes into the food system as feed for chickens, hogs, et cetera, et cetera. But I was down in Georgia at a plant in this job where you source the raw material, which is what we call a hedgeable commodity, soybeans. You manage the risk, so you're actually trading futures, buying and selling, and you're also collaborating locally with a whole cross-functional team of engineers, operations people, accounting, and it was just super cool. So I did that. I went up to Minneapolis and was promoted to more of a trading job that was more global, that was fascinating. And then I left for a year. So back to how long did I stay at Cargill? I left for a year, did a year of volunteer work was a bit of a sabbatical, you could call it. Cargill was incredibly supportive in Montana, working with at-risk children. And then came back to Cargill, was in Norfolk, Virginia, then went back to business school.
Did they give you leadership responsibilities early on, prior to the business school period? Because I know you went back to them afterwards, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
They did. They another, I think, and you just and I think about this quite a bit. I think at that time, one thing that really distinguished a company like Cargill is they were really aggressive to give people responsibility, perhaps more than the resume would suggest they have earned. Right. And in fact, when this little stint that I did in Virginia, which was after I went to Montana for the year, so I had about 2 years of experience with Cargill and then sort of 3 years since college, I actually was put in as an interim manager of that facility.
Wow.
So I went from
at a very young age.
An incredibly young age.
Yeah,
it was like drinking from a fire hose, man.
I can imagine. Yeah.
There was a lot of phone calls to a lot of people like, now this person said this to me, because really, to your point, it's a craft, right? Management, leadership, you learn it. And the human element is so experience driven in terms of how you manage it. So it was way more than I deserved and way more than I could handle. But we figured it out and it went just fine.
What were some of the lessons you learned during that assignment in particular? Yeah,
I think that one, the importance of really listening to everybody. It was, in fact, a pretty tough situation where the former manager had been let go for some unfortunate circumstances. And
you came in instead. You were his replacement.
I was a placeholder. They had hired a man that had been working in Brazil who just couldn't get up there for several months.
Got it.
And so I was sort of the gap filler. But boy, the climate was incredibly unhealthy. There was a lot of distrust. Multiple versions for every story. So I think slowing things down, listening, not rushing to judgment, and then, as I said earlier, not being afraid to ask for help. I was blessed in that a place like Cargill that is so big was really deep and wide with a lot of management expertise. So there was a lot of people to call to ask for help and advice.
Do you remember the first time you started managing people, Pete?
Well, the formal, it really was then. It was that experience, because all of a sudden I went from zero to, there were probably 8 people reporting to me. I probably did those people a tremendous disservice for that 6 months or so, but I was trying anyway. But I would say the next, and when I was in Montana doing this volunteer work, I did have some staff management responsibilities. So that was an interesting one. But the big step up was when I finished business school and took on full general management responsibilities.
Right. So you went to HBS. Did Cargill support that effort in terms of the financial part of it, or take a break, kid, and we'll hire you back when you're done?
Yeah. So Cargill was terrific about it. And they had just started to recruit MBAs. And so they had not yet fully committed to the notion of whether the MBA was an overall positive thing versus just working your way up. So the initial conversation went like this to some trusted mentors and the man that ran the business, the global business that I was in. Well, Pete, we think it'd be better if you just stay here. Because they're really,
is it money? Do you need more money?
But I think he was quite sincere, and he had,
they didn't quite see the value of it, right?
Well, I think the point of view was, look, we can give you lots of different experiences all over the world with different types of businesses and what could be better. That being said, by the time we were done with that conversation, we had landed on, if I were to come back after business school, they would help pay for part of it. So there was an incentive to come back, which I was really grateful that they were willing to put out there.
What was your motivation? Did you just feel you kind of reached a point that you wanted to, kind of retool, learn some new tools? Did you kind of recognize that, that was a good career move in terms of your future resume building? What were the motivations around taking that break and then coming back?
Yeah. So I think it was a few things. Number one, I really started to learn that business was and aspects of leadership in business was a craft to learn. And I was very committed to this notion of general management, running an organization, leading. And there were gaps. There were true, things like the basic fundamentals of finance and accounting. And so I wanted some very specific skills. I think there were two other reasons. One was that it was a bit of a hedging strategy. I really loved working at Cargill. I loved the experience. And I didn't doubt, in fact, that perhaps had I stayed there, I'm not sure my experience would have been any worse in some respects. Just pure learning the business, particularly the agribusiness food system. But I wanted the ability to have something on the resume that people would take notice of, right? And so, quite honestly, for me, I didn't really want to go to just any business school. I was sort of like, if I'm going to do this and commit the time and the money, I want to go somewhere that has a strong brand. Right. And then the third reason, Brent, is I said to myself, I'm on this weird path. I've lived in a number of different places already. I can see myself perhaps living all over the world. And I was like, geez, I may never get home. And I want to go home for a little bit. So, having grown up in the Boston area, Harvard was a good choice. Yeah.
Well, I know that I'm sure you went in there, particularly given that Cargill maybe wasn't as supportive as they could have been for you to go on to get your MBA with the mind, well, maybe I'll go back, maybe I'll look at something else. But you did go back, and tell us a little bit about your thinking there. What kind of led you to that decision that was a place you wanted to go back to after you graduated from HBS?
Yeah. So this is the late 90s. I graduated from business school in 97. One of the things I should also say that the benefit of going back to school was to learn more about what's out there, right? To really figure out and understand what other sorts of organizations, businesses might be of interest. So there was a lot of investigation, searching. And the one thing I figured out probably about halfway through, Brent, was I am drawn to this notion of general management, leadership, taking responsibility for sort of the bottom line of the organization. And at that time, the notion of coming out of business school as in your, mid to late 20s, and someone was going to give you a consequential general management job to run a P&L. There weren't many of them. The classic tracks were
investment banking.
Consulting. But then the bigger, incredibly well-respected organizations often had a development program that would put you down that path that could last 3 years, and then you get a P&L. And quite honestly, I was impatient. I had tasted it with Cargill. And then the other path, and I think it's amazing for people today, was certainly the entrepreneurial path. But I would say in my time, not many people, at least at Harvard, were going out and starting their own businesses right out of the chute. Some did. It was the beginning of the .com boom. So that was, you asked me earlier about this notion of, what were my entrepreneurial sort of efforts early. And, that's another sort of crossroads where there were people, good friends of mine, sort of amazingly taking on these what seemed like oddball businesses at the time, and I had a lot of respect for them. But for me, back to Cargill, I wanted a P&L. The other thing at that time, Brant, I still had this one desire to live around the world, and the job they offered me was to go build a business in Ukraine. And I had a lot of interest, that whole Budapest, the sort of East-West, former Soviet Union, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And then I got engaged, and my wife, who is an adventure spirit, was like, all right, let's do it. So we were bound for Ukraine. That sort of, that was where we thought we were going. But that's not what happened. Because we took the summer off, and we're going to drive cross country. We didn't have much, but we sold everything we had because we were going to Ukraine. It was a furnished housing arrangement.
Right.
And, this is before readily available cell phones. So we rented one of those big brick phones, and we're getting ready to disappear for 8 weeks. And I called my boss at Cargill, and I said, hey, just checking in because I'll be out of touch for 8 weeks. Kind of button up some things, the logistics of the whole Ukrainian thing.
Right.
And he said, oh, Pete. And this is very classic Cargill. It was like so wild back then. He said, we've been trying to get in touch with you. Who knows if he was really trying to get in touch with me. I don't know when they would have actually called me, but they said, you know what? Ukraine thing is off. The parliament, the former communists sort of took over parliament, were shutting down Western investment. Cargill was backing off. Plans had to change. And they said, but we have this amazing job for you. It was like back to Cedar Rapids kind of story.
Yeah, you knew that was coming.
Yay. And, but it was an amazing job. They had restructured some of their North American operations, one of these bigger businesses. And so it was a new job. It was a very big P&L. And it was an opportunity to run a business that was restructured. So not new businesses, but new business configuration. And in fact, I went back to the Southeast, my second trip through Georgia, and spent a lot of time working in the Southeast. But with Cargill, I was all over. So that was the first job out of school.
Well, let's skip ahead because I want to talk a little bit about Bay State Milling. I know that you got a C-suite opportunity at EFS Network and left Cargill for that. But I know you've got a pretty interesting story that landed you at Bay State. And you've been there, 17, 18 years now. And tell us a little bit about that journey and how you first came into that role.
Yeah, it was really it was a marriage of geographic convenience to start, Brant. I had been at that company and helped start at EFS Network. We had gone through a major transaction where we merged, and we moved the company headquarters to California. It was a much more focused path on being a true tech company rather than sort of this hybrid tech company serving food companies. And after the merger, I maintained my position as number 2, but it just, the combination of California and my heart and soul is really in this food system. Yeah. So, more importantly, my father had some health issues, and, despite my desire to live all over the world, once my wife and I started having children, we have 3, and they were quite young at this time, we felt the pull to be among family. And so we made what was probably not the wisest financial maneuver at the time, and said, hey, let's just move back to Boston. I kept my job and sort of was commuting out to the West Coast, but was very forthright with the new CEO of the merged entity, and started thinking about repositioning my career. In doing that, a former business school professor introduced me to, at that time, the president of Bay State Milling and one of the principal owners. And it was dumb luck, they were really just starting to think about the next generation of their management. The the industry had been through some tough times post Atkins diet, the anti-carbohydrates and Bay State milling. If we haven't discussed, sorry, its history is about 122 years now of milling wheat, among other things that we do. Right. But the pitch went like this: look, we need to rebuild the management team. We think there's a lot of room to for a person like you to make a difference. And for me, I wanted to be on that path to run a company. And Brian Rothwell, again, the former president, now our chairman, said, look, we're a family-owned business, but the next CEO, there's no guarantee it's going to be family. And so the path is open for you, and everything worked out well. And
did you come in as CEO or did
No. I worked for Brian. I was because again, they weren't actively yet rebuilding the team. They made me VP of strategy, and there was a lot of work to be done. There was a lot of things that needed rethinking. There was a lot of, and still are, terrific, long-serving employees who were functionally excellent at these sort of discrete parts of the business, and it's a really, really tough business. But there hadn't been a lot of current thinking about how to organize ourselves, the importance of, I would call it at that time, kind of modern teaming. So we did some work on the strategy, which has served us well. And there was just a lot of room to help impact what we'd call more the health side of the business. So there were some good sort of smarts, but lots of room on the health, and that was and has been a
big focus.
Yeah.
When did you step into the CEO role?
Just over 3 years ago. So it was about I like to joke, it was about a 12-year interview.
They were still checking. Yeah. Well, with a family business, were they third or fourth generation?
So we are now fourth generation owned, and we've got some fifth generation employees.
And you mentioned 9 manufacturing plants. How many employees in total?
So it's about 550 employees. Yeah. It's much more kind of capital intensive. Think big plants, less people. And the size of the company is about 3 times now the size from when we started.
When you joined, Oh, when they started. Okay.
No. When I started. So when you call that, just over, to your point, 15, 16 years ago. And, but the number of people is not dramatically different. So, through the types of processing we do, automation,
efficiencies,
and what you've seen is a shift, more towards, R&D, marketing. So same number of people, just kind of different composition.
Yeah. How would you say your leadership styles evolved over time, particularly during this last 17 years there at Bay State Milling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think some things that haven't changed are this notion of just trying to bring a lot of energy and passion to the job. But I think 15 plus years ago, Brant, a lot of things that were important were, and this was very successful at a place like Cargill, at least for me personally, challenging the status quo, challenging people to rise to the occasion, really working hard to be the change agent. I think what is different now is a lot more focus on building trusts, creating an opportunity for people to be more vulnerable, to access their whole selves, and more about encouraging others to drive the change. And I'd say another big distinction is gratitude. I think that 15, 20 years ago, I had less of a sense of how grateful someone like me should be for, my privilege, the opportunities, the people that helped support it. And now I really and I have a lot more work to do on this, am much more deliberate to catch people doing the right thing. Just telling them how terrific that was. And a lot of times it's not about landing the big customer, developing the next product. It's the effort, right?
The little things. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Company culture is such a big part of it, particularly given the fourth generation family ownership. What would you say is most unusual or perhaps unique about Bay Milling?
Yeah, well, it starts with the benefit of that notion of kind of multi-generational ownership.
Yeah.
And so, things that I think make us unique are this notion of caring. It's a very caring culture, but yet competitive at the same time, right? So these sort of you'd think those things can't actually coexist. I think the notion of humility is very, very important for us, which is integral to the way we do the work. It's a kind of business that the analog is more like a football team rather than a basketball team. And
lots of moving parts.
Lots of moving parts, lots of different jobs. Incredibly important that those are well synchronized, that there's lots of trust, and not a lot of room for superstars to capture the spotlight. And so it's kind of it's a we deal versus I. But I think the distinct parts are this notion of kindness, humility, and I'd add one more. There's an incredible devotion to sort of being service minded, whether it's our customers, our internal or external customers. I always joke, with our some of our operational people, and we are very inclined to always try to be different. We sort of compete on the base of differentiation, but when we're dealing with difficult operational issues, I always remind people, put a customer's name on it and you will get everybody's attention. It's fascinating. Telling people, hey, we'll make another X, Y, or Z on the bottom line. Not that we're not attentive to our responsibility and opportunity to grow the bottom line, but you put a customer name or a team member's name on it, and it's like, wow.
Makes a big difference.
If that's what it's about, it sort of personalizes it. And
Well, we're just about out of time, but I've got two last questions that I'd really love to get your insights on. And Pete, the first one is, what do you personally look for when you're, making bets on the people you invest in and hire?
Yeah, such a great question. And I will humbly say I am still learning. But I think it is largely a big part of a manager and leader's role. When I think about making bets on people, I tend to want to have baseline some smarts. There's just got to be sort of a core, and a lot of this is contextual. We tend to do hard things, so that's smart problem solving, values driven, and values are it's an open market for values. So the things within those values that we care about are the very things I talked about our culture, right? This notion of service-minded leadership, humility. But those are big ones: problem-solving, smarts, service-minded leadership. And I'd say the last one is grit. Agriculture is the base of the business. Everything that we do starts with growing something. And I'll tell you, partnering with Mother Nature, you better have grit, because she
it gets back to that hard work you learned.
Yeah,
growing up
she's
as a kid
a tricky
in
one,
Boston.
very unpredictable.
Yeah.
So
Right.
a lot of forces that no matter how hard you work, you're going to get the curveball.
Well, lastly, Pete, we obviously have a lot of folks listening to this podcast, perhaps some folks in your company, perhaps folks who want to work there one day, or others that are maybe just, looking for some career advice. What would you say to someone who perhaps has their eyes on the corner office, maybe 10, 15 years behind you in your career?
Yeah, I'd say three things. First, you should really have a sense of what it's like when you get there. And no one should feel sorry for a CEO. That is not the point here, but it's a lonely job. If you are accustomed to a lot of positive feedback, if you are someone who really needs a lot of attention from your manager, this is when you report to a board, it's a different gig. And the celebrity CEO jobs, which are a different path, are different altogether. And the second thing I would say is, if this is what you aspire to, look for opportunities for different jobs that allow you to collaborate and lead in different circumstances with different types of people. Working among diverse problems and diverse people, it's a huge opportunity. And then the last thing I would say is know thyself. Often the biggest enemy when you get to positions like this is your own challenges that you haven't self-identified.
Well, Pete Levangie, President and CEO of Bay State Milling Company, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.